Hi, welcome to part 2 of the basic photography tutorial, and we're going to talk about lighting and composition in this part. So oftentimes when people look at photographs, they'll have an emotional response, or hopefully if it's a good photograph, they'll have an emotional response to it. And you might be thinking, why does this photograph look more pleasing than that photograph, or why certain images just work better than others? And there are certain general guidelines to photography, or that can help you compose images that are a little bit more pleasing, and hopefully fall into that category of just looking nicer than the other photographs. So probably the most important and most often referenced of those rules is the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds basically divides your frame or portrait or whatever into a 3x3 grid, essentially, where along the intersection points of that grid and along those lines, certain objects like a horizon or a face or whatever will lie within that line. And for whatever reason, the rule of thirds provides a very basic but very compelling way to compose your images. The images whereas here you see the horizon at the top and her face right here align to two lines within this grid. And because of that, in part because of that at least, this image is compelling, and it just works. There's balance to it. It just, the image is better than, say, an image that isn't compositionally sound. This image that we saw in part 1 is very similar, and like many images that compositionally work, that just look good, it follows the rule of thirds. And you can see her body aligning to the rule, or to the one of the lines, and her arm out here aligning to another one, and the crowd kind of all in here. So although the rule of thirds doesn't necessarily mean that all photographs that are compositionally sound are going to be following the rule of thirds. Far from it. But nevertheless, this is a good basic way of just kind of composing your images if you're just starting out and your eye is developing. It's kind of like learning grammar in elementary school. Hopefully some of you guys learn grammar in elementary school, but when you guys do, you kind of forget about it later on, in high school or college or work or whatever. And when you're writing, you don't necessarily think about what is a direct object, or what is what is the verb of this sentence, or the noun. You might forget about a lot of that stuff, but nevertheless, it was the foundation of what you learned as a writer. And similarly, the rule of thirds can act as a foundation of your of your understanding how to compose an image as a photographer. So the rule of thirds is just a very good tool to use as a photographer, as a beginning photographer, and as any photographer, to compose your images, because they'll generally be a little bit compositionally stronger than as if they're kind of all haphazard and lack balance. The second topic we're going to talk about is lighting. And oftentimes, shooting for the Sacramento Press, you might be in a situation like this, where I was photographing this tree planting, and you just have these stark shadows, and it's part of the day, where the sun's nearing its zenith. I think it was like 9 or 10 o'clock, so it still had a little bit of ways to go, but nevertheless, it was pretty high up in the sky, and these stark shadows on this cloudy day were being, cast on these people. So who should be the focal point of this image, this representative from the city, who's teaching everyone how to do the planting, is now, you can barely see her. You have these stark shadows all over her, and you have these kind of weird shadow down here and stark shadows all over the place. It's just not that pleasant to look at, and it prevents you from, telling your story as a photographer. But, you can kind of, hopefully make lemonades out of lemons, if you can just explore your space like I was talking about earlier, take some photographs, and this isn't a super fantastic image, but that it's a lot stronger than this one. And part of the reason why is because you can see what the heck is going on. People are properly exposed, and although you kind of have this, the extreme sunlight is being kind of exposed, whereas like here it was exposing these people, and here, now it's kind of acting as a silhouette or the highlight on top of the people. It's kind of a nice effect, and it's a much, it makes for a much more compelling image than if you have the features of a person being obscured by darkness, than to have the outline of these people being highlighted by the sunlight. All right. And another good way of using lighting, if you can, it's a good time to photograph is called the magic hour. It's during the sunset or sunrise, and typically sunset, knowing most photographers. But nevertheless, the last hour of sunlight, you cast some really interesting light, rather. And you can use that as a photographer to make some compelling images. Whereas if the lighting was more like this, it might just be a little bit less interesting than if it's coming in from the side and casting more of a warm glow on everything. And although this isn't necessarily the best example of that, you nevertheless can see how the light is being cast differently. If it's from the side of a person, it's a little less obstructive than if it's from the top of a person or top of a person's face, like in here. So the magic hour, the dusk, is a good time if you do have the option of shooting whenever you'd like, and you'd like that kind of warm look. Dusk is a nice time to go out there. So the last hour or so, and even into after the sun sets, you might have kind of interesting glow to play around with. So lighting can be a little bit more compelling at those times of days. And also notice how in this photograph you can kind of see the rule of thirds to kind of bring that back. I don't have that handy outline for this photograph, but you can see how he and both the horizon align to that, and it makes for compositionally a fairly strong image. Also, something to remember is when there's an overcast sky, it acts as a giant diffuser. So light is a lot more soft on everything because the sun is being diffused, and all the clouds, all that light is coming down from the entire sky. And so it's like, instead of having one lighting source, that like, even though it's all coming from the sun, it's, that instead of it having, that direct sunlight that's going from the sun to your face, it's bouncing around in the atmosphere, and it makes for a little bit more of a diffuse and more pleasant look, potentially, if that's what you're going for, on those overcast days than with those stark shadows. So you can just kind of remember, how different lighting, how different times of day, and also how the weather can affect the way your photographs are going to look. So yeah, just make sure to remember all these different rules, like the rules of composition, the rule of thirds, and also how to use lighting. Kind of move around in your environment, and think about how your lighting is interacting with your subjects.